My father passed away, and my uncle, who was also a lawyer, was in charge of my father's will. So, when the will was read to the family, can you believe how I felt when I found out something crazy that my father never told me? My story is a case of an abused trust and greediness at the highest level. It's a type of story that will get you thinking if some people are devils incarnate. I don't even know where to start, but I believe as I go deeper into the story, I'll gain more clarity. My name's Humphrey. I'm a good-looking young man in my late 20s. My sister Lillian is the last born of my mother. She's in her early 20s. Before my late father passed away, he was a hard-working man who worked with one of the construction companies in my country. He loved us as a family and made sure that we lacked of nothing. He tried in our education because, well, I and my sister attend good standard schools. Even though it's not the best in town, but it's still some kids' prayer points. In the company he worked, he was their site construction manager, a position he achieved through hard work and diligentness. When I was a kid, I used to see him staying awake all night drawing new building plans. He absolutely loves his job as well. My dad believed in his family so much that he trained two of his brothers in university, even when he only attended Polytechnic. He's a passionate, ambitious man who does believe that with hard and smart work, one can amaze good fortune. His favorite quote was this: "Any man diligent in his work will stand before kings." I don't even know the part of the scripture it's taken from. We're not a very rich family per se. We are among the upper class, who just live comfortably within our means. My dad is a disciplined man who only spends on some things necessary. My mom, on the other hand, is working as a salesperson in one of the biggest grocery chains. Her salary is not below average, and she supports the family with it. She makes sure that my sister Lillian is well taken care of. With the salary of my dad and mom, they were able to purchase a land property at the outskirts of the town. During that time, many people are not interested in buying any land property at the location because the area is not anywhere close to well developed. Before purchasing the land, late father told my mom one day that the location, even though people are not interested in it now, in the near future it'll be worth more than gold. Well, my mother was not that convinced as my dad, but she doesn't have any other option than to believe. After purchasing the land property in a short time, my dad was promoted to a site construction manager, and maybe that came with some extra money. He began to develop the property gradually, not too long after he completed the building. It was a small apartment that was perfect for us as a family. The building was well furnished to the taste of my father, and I was still a child then. Even though I remembered almost everything that happened during that era, it was as if I knew that one day I would be sharing this story here. As of the time that our new house was completed, it was estimated that the net worth is about $250,000, which is not too bad considering the location of the property. My father worked so hard to ensure that he kept us in a comfortable state. Apart from a construction job, he also has a small poultry farm. One thing I love about my dad is that even though I'm a young boy, he still takes out time to tell me some important things about our family that I simply need to know. He would tell me how many people he's owing and how many that's owing him. With that, I was able to know most things even as an adult. I needed no one to tell me how things are in the family. Uncle Joe is the immediate younger brother to my father. Even before I was born, Uncle Joe was living with us. It was after my 3rd birthday that he moved out of our house to his apartment. The relationship between my father and Uncle Joe is more like a family. My father once told me how he loved his younger brother because of his intelligence and smartness. Perhaps that was the reason he sponsored him for university where he studied law. I'm not over-hyping Uncle Joe. He definitely is a brilliant lawyer who has been practicing law for over 15 years now. He's won several cases for his clients and also made an absolute fortune for himself. On one occasion, he told me how my dad helped him during his university days. Also, saw him through law school. Uncle Joe respects my father so well that one will think he is his biological father. Merely looking at Uncle Joe, you would know that he is so dedicated to his career that he does everything within his ability to make sure that any court case goes in favor of his client. Uncle Joe is a happily married man, blessed with 3 kids, and the oldest son named Rodrigo. He's living in a rented apartment in a busy area of the town, and once I overheard him and my father discussing a plan to acquire a landed building where he will be erecting his own house. My father suggested that he should come down to our neighborhood just to get a piece of the land. That's way cheaper than in the busy area of the state they were in. He told my father that this neighborhood is still undeveloped, and that it'll take several years before people start acquiring properties at this axis of town. My dad tried everything possible to convince him that the development usually occurs like a flash of light. Even if he's not going to reside here, he can still sell the property once the value skyrockets. So, he agreed that he was going to talk to his wife about that. Till today, I don't know if he later did get back to my father or not. Rodrigo and I had a perfect cousin relationship because they lived too far away from ours, and we don't see each other often. But anytime we did see, we played ourselves out. I can vividly remember how my father used to drive me and my sister to Uncle Joe's house. It used to be a very exciting visit that we looked forward to occasionally. I know you'll be wondering if my sister Lillian is ever in the picture. Yes, Lillian attended boarding school. Most of the time, she would not be home. She only came home during a public holiday or after school closure. One of the flaws that my father has is, quote, trusting too much. He trusts people in such a way that you would be wondering if he's under a spell. I recalled when I confronted him to stop trusting people that the hearts of men are wicked, but he did not yield to my advice. I allowed him to his fate. Time keeps flying, hours turn into days, days turn into weeks, and weeks into months, and months into years. I left home to pursue my life's own goals. Things weren't all that good, but with hope and optimism, I kept on pushing through life. I spoke with my parents through the phone calls to ascertain the nature of things at home. One day, I called my parents per usual, and my sister Lillian picked up the phone. Bro, Lillian, how are you doing? I'm fine, but Dad's sick. What? Since when? Where are they now? My sister told me that my mom and Uncle Joe took my father to the hospital to proper treatment. I was confused. I didn't know what to do. I was supposed to be at the office that morning for a crucial meeting with some of our company's investors. I called my boss because I had an emergency that I needed to take care of at home. My boss permitted me to travel home to sort it all out. I booked the first available flight and journeyed down home. When I got home, I met my only sister, but with her look, I noticed that something is not right. Lillian, which hospital's Dad taken to? She says St. Patrick's General Hospital. Okay, I replied. I dragged my luggage into my room, picked up a cab, and headed straight to the hospital. Several thoughts were just rushing through my mind on the way. What if Dad dies? How will Mom cope? How will my little sister Lillian get through the shock? In all, I prayed slightly, asking God to spare the life of my father. St. Patrick's General Hospital is about a 40-minute drive, and soon I was able to get there. I alighted from the vehicle and headed up to the ward that Uncle Joe described to me earlier. When my mom saw, she wanted to talk to me, but a drop of tears rolled down her cheeks. I held her and told her it's okay. Dad will get well soon. Looking at the condition my father was in, fear gripped me more because it was a critical state. After standing near my father for some minutes without any words coming out of his mouth, My Uncle Joe broke the silence. "Humphrey, I and your dad are brothers. I know him more than you know him. He's a fighter. He'll pull through this too." "Well," I said, "Uncle Joe, I hope he does recover from this illness." We were there until nighttime, and my uncle stood to go. My mom insisted I follow him back home so I can keep Lillian company for the night. And on my way home, my uncle and I discussed several things concerning the family. He even advised me that I should be a man, not show my weakness in times like this, and that I should pray more, that I would worry this time around. I don't know what to say, but I managed to say, "Thank you, sir." So I asked him about Rodrigo, because it has been a long time since I've seen him, and my uncle tells me that Rodrigo is now training to be a professional basketball player. Well, that's very good of him. At least soon we'll have a superstar in the family. We all smiled for a minute or so before we went back to our sober mood. My uncle dropped me off at home before heading back to his home, which is about a 90-minute drive. My sister Lillian asked me how Dad is faring. I told her that he would be better. She gave me a sorrowful smile from which I understood her fears, and that night several thoughts were rushing into my mind. I couldn't even sleep. The image of my father kept on appearing in my mind. Questions like, what if he dies? What if he doesn't survive? What'll Mom do? This is just a lot of other questions that keep reappearing over and over, and I seem to not be ready to answer any of the questions yet. The next day, my route was from home to the hospital, or the hospital to the bank, and vice versa. Update number 1. Well, guys, for me, the past few days were very stressful and filled with sadness. 3 days later, after the first update, my father died. I was at home that day preparing to join my mother in the hospital, and my phone rang. It was my mother. I picked up and I could hear her fading voice. "Humphrey, your father's dead." "What? When? How?" "This morning. The doctor confirmed him dead this morning." And at that point I dropped the phone. I could not hold back tears, as it was a flood of uncontrolled tears in my eyes. I sat down on the sofa thinking I would work up the reality, but it looked like I was already stuck by the reality of life. My sister came to my room to know what was going on because I agreed that we would follow her to the hospital so she could see our day. She saw the tears in my eyes and knew that automatically things are not okay. She came closer with a soft tune and asked me if Dad's okay. I said no, he's not. And my mom called and informed me that he was in fact dead. Well, at that moment, my sister began to weep uncontrollably. I can personally feel her pain, but we can't possibly do anything to bring him back to life. We did our possible best. I consoled my sister before heading to the hospital. Before I got to the hospital, Uncle Joe was already there with me, and my father's corpse had been moved to the mortuary pending the burial date. Before we could return home from the hospital, we did some clearance at the hospital, clearing some bills off our file. When we got home, my mom looked like a shadow of herself, and I understood the scenario. It's not easy to lose a soulmate. Uncle Joe tried consoling her as much as he could, and before he left, he told me that he'll come in the next 2 days just to discuss when the burial will take place. This is also to give my mom a chance to heal. Throughout that, our house was sober, and soon family and friends started coming to console us when we lost. And the grieving atmosphere was automatically activated in our house. From far and near, condolence messages were coming in the form of letters, social media messages, emails. This period is among the memories I won't forget in a hurry. 2 days later, my mom regained herself. Maybe she's decided to accept her fate just like my sister and I did. Uncle Joe came with his family, including Rodrigo, who came back home because of the loss. We discussed it as family and concluded that my dad's burial will be in a week. And as such, proper preparation and invitation should commence immediately. Preparation for my dad's burial commenced, but Rodrigo did not follow his family back. He stayed back to help me put things in. The church where my dad worshipped where he was alive was contacted too. Invitations were also sent to some friends and distant relations. The venue for the funeral service, well, it's going to be decorated and everything is set. During the funeral service, many people honored our invitation. I was wowed to see number of people that came. Our family wore black clothing, which represents death so well. The Reverend Minister rendered his sermon, and my dad's lifeless body was being covered with earth inside of a 6-foot grave. Soon, that burial was over, and our guests were entertained as we could. Some stayed back longer to chat and encourage the affected family, while others, who have another thing to catch up on, left almost immediately. That is much as I can remember from my late father's burial. A few weeks after the burial, life returned back to normal. My mom was a bit stronger now, and it seems to have moved on with her life. My sister Lillian went back to school to continue her studies, and I left my working place too. After my graduation, I got a job with a tech company where I worked as a data analyst. Do you remember what my father told Uncle Joe about the neighborhood he acquired his landed property? The prophecy, or rather, let me put it this way, my father's projection is about to be fulfilled. Before my father's death, an election was held and a new government emerged. That new government wanted to transform the capital of my state. And to do this, they needed to shift all the big factories and companies located in the capital to places that have more space, less developed. It was not an easy task for the government, but they're bent on transforming the capital into a residential area. The owners of the companies and factories have no choice but to relocate to a new site that the government has allocated to them. The new site is within the area where my dad landed property. At first, I could not understand the economical benefits of such migration, and soon the neighborhood that Uncle Joe called a lonely and deserted place became a bustling, busy part of the town. All those companies started buying off properties and investing more into the development of the community. People started looking for landed properties to buy, and those who had large land started constructing buildings for rent. One day, a group of people met my mom and told her that they would like to buy the property. My mom told them that the property is that of her late husband, and she's not touching anything from it until my late dad's will is read by his lawyer. One of the people who came, who identified himself as the manager of the company, told my mom that in case she made up her mind that they'll be willing to pay over $1 million for the property. My mom called me and narrated everything to me later that day. I was wondering how fast things can change. Just a few years ago, this property was worth $250,000. Now it's worth over $1 million? Which means the property appreciated fivefold. This time, I began to wonder how my late father was able to get his predictions correctly every time. Maybe because he is into construction, or just natural wisdom. My only regret is that he's not alive to enjoy the fruits of his labor. According to my mom, she told me that those companies who came to purchase the property are very serious. Every week, they constantly call her to ascertain if she's changed her mind. Update number 2. After a while, I contacted my mother to find out if my late father left a will before he died, but she said she didn't know. At that juncture, I'd mixed feelings about why a man like my father could not even write a single will before his death. On the contrary, I also thought that since we are just 3 of me, my mom and my younger sister, Lillian, there'll be no need for a will. But that was just an assumption that could either be true or false. At that moment, I directed my mom to ascertain from Uncle Joe, since he is the only lawyer my dad associated with when he was alive. But before my mom contacted Barrister Joe, we didn't know that a lot has been going on. You remember those companies' representatives that wanted to buy off the late dad's property for over $1 million? Well, they also visit Joe and told him about their interest in acquiring the property. Maybe they told Uncle Joe because they feel that since he's a close member of the family, it'll be easier for him to convince me and Mother. They never know that they were actually instigated a cold war. They've activated the greediness in my uncle's veins. My uncle became greedy and started looking for a way to have a greater percentage of the value of the property if we later decide to sell. After some days, my mom visits Uncle Joe in his office. She asked him if he's in the custody of my late dad's will, and he says yes. And my mom told him that one company representative was interested in acquiring the property for over $1 million. That he needs to read the will or have a hearing for us or give us a copy of the will so we know what the next action is to take. Uncle Joe politely told my mom that she's done well by coming to ask for her late husband's will. Without trusting time, she should contact me to return home the following weekend so he can read the will to hearings of others. I must be present since I am the eldest of the only son of his late brother. When my mom communicated what my uncle said, I had no problem with it. I quickly gamed to make arrangements for how to return home, and I met my boss at the office, explained the nature of things, and he permitted me to travel home on the following Friday morning and return for Monday morning work. Throughout this week, I was anxious and very optimistic. I began to imagine what my father could have willed to me. My sister and my mom, of course. I had no doubt my father would at least give me 60% of his wealth. The reason why I said so was that my dad and I had a perfect father-son relationship. He has never regretted why he begged me until his death. I made sure that I'm always there when my family needs me. So, when I said I'm optimistic, I know exactly what I'm talking about. Don't get me wrong. I am also a hard and smart-working young man who doesn't depend on his father's wealth. I work in a company where I'm a paid handsome man. And I've also begun to make plans on how to acquire my personal property. So practically, I see my father's wealth as just additional help that can help the family to achieve our goals at a quicker speed. Update number 3. On Friday, I packed some of my clothes and other things that I'll use for my travel baggage. I've booked a 9 a.m. flight and it's just about 7:30. I'm traveling in my car, so I have to take a cab to the airport. When I arrived, my mom and sister came with my late father's car to pick me up from the airport. Looking at the red-painted SUV, a memory of my dad flashed into my imagination. How he often used that car to take me to school when I was in college. A quick smile crossed across my face for a minute, and I muttered to myself, "Well, that's life, isn't it? Yeah, that's life after all." On our way home, Mom and Lillian talked about how fast our neighborhood's developing and how big companies are building their factories with speed. My mom even suggested that I should start making plans to get a job from one of those companies. I just replied, "Okay, Mama," just to save myself from further sermons down the road. Even along the way to our house, I started seeing the evidence what my mom was telling me. Before the journey, the development was just going so slowly. But what I came back to was such a quick transformation. My remote neighborhood is now amongst the busiest parts of the town, all thanks to the government for relocating these major factories and companies to my town. So, we reached the family home. Everything seems to be normal completely. Mom's back to her jovial nature, and I feel good seeing my mom happy. That night, we spent most of our time talking about how fast the property appreciated. Though for me, it wasn't that fast because it was about 20 years ago that my father purchased the property and, well, put a building on it. On Saturday morning, at about 10 a.m. sharp, we were only seated waiting for my Uncle Joe to come when my late dad's will. He arrived soon with his son Rodrigo and immediately stood up to address us. He started, "Today is a day we will listen to the will of my late brother, your father. It's so unfortunate that he has to pass away at a time where we all needed him." Others were paying attention to his speech, but at the same time, I was wondering why he came with his son. to my late dad's will. I refocused on the speech to properly get what he was reading, and at the end of the will reading, we noticed 80% of my father's wealth included our land property was willed to my uncle's son Rodrigo? At first, my mom and other people that were there were thrown into confusion. I gathered myself together and stood up and thanked my uncle for reading the dad's will, and I told him that this was trash. This can never be my father's will, and I know full well that he manipulated this rubbish that he just read here. My mom supported me, and my uncle insisted, no, this is my late father's will. It was a battle of words that morning. At that point, I know the Cold War started, and I needed to fight back and get what belonged to the family. Update number 4. Well, I can see a lot of comments and people following my story. I feel good, and I appreciate every one of you. Most of the comments I'm reading here say, it's my father's fault. Well, I won't totally deny that my father made his own mistakes by at least not putting down a well because of the trust he had with his younger brother. After that day, I wanted to see my uncle in court, but with my mom's plea that I will be destroying my father's legacy if I sue my uncle in court, she suggested that we go by dialogue. Well, and if it didn't work, then we would resort to other alternatives. So my mom and I visit my uncle at his law office. We try our best to make him see the reasons why this is not our father's will, but he paid us no attention. He even told us that we should do anything we want to do. My mom and I stood up and left his office with anger and bitterness in our hearts. Few people did not understand, quote, why my uncle suddenly became so greedy. Well, maybe it's because of my late dad's property that now's worth over $1 million. Remember my dad, when he was alive, advised him to acquire landed property in the neighborhood and he refused? All I can see is a man who's been consumed in the ocean of greediness, a man who wants to reap from where he did not sow. He can't even respect my late dad because of what he did for him, seeing him through the school and others. The funniest part of this madness is that his wife and children supported him. At some point, I began to feel insane. This is a pure daylight robbery, and I will not let it slide. I promised my mom that I will do anything within my power to make sure I reclaimed my late dad's property. The only option we were left with was to take the case to law court. We didn't hesitate to explore the option. We hired a good lawyer, and the case started. Yes, God was so kind. It ended up in our favor. However, it was not an easy ride. It took months before the court magistrate gave his final judgment, and we visit the court so many times. Each time, seatings bring its own drama. It was a heck of a roller coaster, but I am also prepared to ride it till the end. On the final day of the judgment, I prayed so hard that luck should be on my side. My mom supported me in any way she could during the legal battle, which lasted over 6 months. After regaining our property from my uncle, I did not sell it because that was not my intention. I had other plans that I'm nurturing. Uncle Joe also confessed that he did write the will, but with the direction of my late father. Yet, the judge overruled his arguments and revoked his license. He was also fined by judge for abusing his authority and illegally capturing land. And he also had to, return all the investors' money. I truly appreciate everyone who read, commented on, and engaged with me, and, I'll conclude it here. I'm just glad the uncle of this story got everything that he deserved. They say karma comes swiftly, and this time, it came swiftly. Guys, let me know what you would have done in this situation if your uncle was this greedy and basically didn't care about his own brother's kids. Let me know your thoughts about this story. Go ahead and drop your opinions down below. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name's Mr. Reddito. I read stories every single day. If that's something you're into, consider subscribing. Have a fantastic day, and I will see you guys tomorrow.